going to be talking to you about understanding our audiences and then creating the right content for them. I followed Marie's lead and put a picture in of my family, but you know my family because you've met Wes. So I am the user experience team lead at headquarters in DPS. Both Wes and I worked in industry for quite a few years before coming to Cru, and so we bring in a history and a background of doing this actually in the secular world. And so yes, there are quite a few differences here at Cru, but it's really fun to figure out how to adapt and help bring some of this in. Before I start, I just want to touch base on this, two things. This piece, the goals, the reason why it's so critical to have this, and Marie helped you to start think about this in her content strategy Mad Lib. So if you didn't get a chance to finish that, which there's a lot there, I'm not surprised if you didn't, I would really encourage you to think through that. There's a statement at the very bottom that says, we'll know we are successful when we see some action by our users, and it'll help us accomplish, and it says business goal. So there are business goals and there are user goals that we need to have in mind, and sometimes they feel like they're a little bit in tension, right? So I have a goal of seeing someone read the gospel and respond to it on everystudent.com. I really want them to respond to the gospel. But the user coming in may not come in with that goal. They may come in with the goal of just having a question about life answered. So we need to recognize that sometimes our user goals are not our business goals. And we're going to talk a little bit about how, when we understand our audiences, we want to work to serve them as well as drive them towards what we're trying to accomplish. Doesn't invalidate our goals, but we have to make sure that they are both there. So that's kind of mentioned in that Mad Libs. And if we don't have goals, then down here when we measure, we won't know if we accomplished what we set out to do. So this is where we get to decide, and many times I hear a lot of questions, well, can I do this, can I do this? It really is your decision, but you should make a decision. If you decide that you're going to go after a specific audience or not, that's okay, but you should write it down and decide that you're not going to or that you are, so that when you go to measure and you say, oh, well, we didn't reach this audience, well, that's because we said we weren't going to. That wasn't our goal. So I can talk to you more about that if you have questions. I know we didn't cover that as much, but that Mad Libs is a helpful place to start. Okay, so user experience. Why am I talking about content strategy? That's because content strategy is all about serving our users, meeting them where they're at. User experience and content strategy are very overlapped. So why do we care? Why do we even do this? Why are we having this conversation? We want to know our users, we want to empathize with them, we want to love them, and we want to serve them. And this comes straight from the Bible. Can I get a volunteer to read this for me?
Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the pay God has distributed to each of you. Be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourself. Romans 12:3 and 10.
Thank you. Can anybody tell me why this verse is important in context of what we're talking about?
It starts off with what we've been talking about. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. So we're going to suppress our curse of knowledge for the benefit of our audience.
Perfect. A lot of times where I see this coming up is when we aren't seeing the results we want to see, and we say, what? Our users are doing something wrong. They're not doing what we want them to do, and we did it right. They're not doing it our way. And instead we should say, no, maybe we're not doing it right. Maybe we need to learn and meet them where they're at so that we can facilitate it in a different way. So sometimes, I could think of a ton of examples. I used to work for an organization that made printers, and the engineers would say, stupid users, they need to just click this button right here. How many people have had problems with printers before? They could do a lot to learn about how people really needed and wanted to use them. Okay, one other verse. This is longer. Would somebody be really willing to read this out loud?
Oh, I'll read it. I've got the mic.
Thank you.
For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jew, I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessing.
Thank you. Anyone tell me why this matters in the context of what we're talking about?
Adapt our message to our audience.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, exactly. Do you think that Paul understood who the Jews were when he became a Jew? Became like a Jew to them? Do you think he understood who the Gentiles were when he became like a Gentile? You can't do that unless you really understand what that means. So that is one of the things I'm going to talk about, is how do we actually gain an understanding of who our users are so that we can become like them, to meet them where they're at, ultimately, in some cases, to drive them in a different direction. So these are a couple of questions to have in mind. This deck is available in the folder for you if you want it later. These questions are related to this integrated content strategy. First one, why do we exist? What goals do we have? What's our purpose? What problem are we trying to solve? What do we care about? That's the goal piece. Second, who are our existing users? And who are we trying to reach? So you may not have existing users of your sites. You may have an audience that you're not reaching yet that you want to. So those are two different types that you can consider when you're looking at this. Thirdly, how will we meet our goals? How will we meet our users' needs? So that's kind of talking the whole piece, everything, what content's needed, what channels. And that's the fourth one, what content will we create or provide for our users? And then finally, where will we meet our users and interact with them? So what channels are they present? We're going to talk today about the second one, who are our users? So the first step in doing this is to identify existing audiences and evaluate current data. So I would be remiss to say, if you have websites, you already have data, and that is a good place to start. Lauren talked a little bit about this yesterday, and digging into the data to kind of see if you can see some patterns is a really good place to get a picture of maybe who the people are. What's the most accessed piece of content? Looking at that piece of content, is it evangelistic or is it for a mature believer? Maybe that'll give you an idea of who your audience is. And so the audit piece, which Marie didn't talk about, but it's in the slides, just looking at everything that you have, who are you going after, who is using it. This is just to get a current state picture. Then we're going to go to step 2, which is to fill in the gaps that we have. Now, maybe you've done a lot of research and you don't have a lot of gaps. That's awesome. Maybe you actually have a lot of gaps. Maybe a lot of these things were based off of an idea, like Marie talked about, or an assumption, and that's okay, but we just want to recognize what those are. So, how do we understand, and understanding new audiences, like I mentioned. Maybe we're not currently serving them, but you have another audience that you actually want to reach. I'm going to use Lillian as an example. I just heard this morning that she's looking at mothers, and they're not sure that maybe mothers actually is an audience that they could potentially reach. So she's doing some digging into what are the channels where she can reach these people and what content can she create to reach them. And so that's a new audience that she doesn't have a lot of data on right now. So there's two types of research, generally speaking, that you can do. And I'm not going to go into detail about this for time's sake. It's a content for another time. Market research, looking at industry reports. There's a ton of things out there, which I'll talk about some of them at the end of the session. Looking at market data and partner analyses. So like if you're working with Jesus Film may have partners that are embedded in your locations who actually have a lot of understanding about the people in these areas. So I would consider that as a potential avenue for learning about your audiences. Who are you partnered with that may be able to give you more information, so you don't have to start from scratch. The second avenue is user research. So user research is quantitative and qualitative. Hopefully, at this step, you've done some of the quantitative work. You've looked at your analytics and you've tried to discover what you can from that. So these mostly talk to, the first two are qualitative. This is personal interviews. So do you have people who have been, quote unquote, success stories of your sites and your content? Interview them, talk to them about how they found it, how they got there, what their experience was, what could be improved, and if they have ideas for what else you can do to reach people like them. The more people you talk to, the more data you have. But I would also say that you guys probably have people in your lives who are your audiences. And so the more that you can kind of think from their perspectives and understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And the second one is surveys. So this is kind of a mix between qualitative and quantitative. But if there's something specific that you want to know, I will say surveys are way harder than they sound. It's really easy for someone to say, let's just put a quick survey together, we'll get back a bunch of information. But the way you design your questions to get back the right information is so important. So, for example, why did you come to our website today? 3 options. I clicked an ad. 2, I did a Google search. 3, I don't know, something else. And they only have 3 options to choose from, and you think it's the most common. Well, what if there's a whole other segment that you didn't even know about? You have an influencer living in a city who's literally passing out cards, with that name of your website on it. So you have to be really careful to not design surveys that are based on your own biases. You have to be able to get new information through surveys. So I say that as a caveat. They're still great, especially for quantitative data, and for being able to say, 75% of people said this. And then analytics and experiments. I'll briefly touch on experiments, but if we know, if you don't know, let's say you don't know if Facebook or what's something else? Another Instagram. Okay, Instagram. Which one is going to be a better channel to reach the people you're going after? You can actually run it on both, right? It's kind of like an A/B test if you've heard that term. And you see where do you get the most response for what reason. And then from that you get to learn and you get to apply that insight back to your understanding of your audience. So that's research in 1 minute. Research is like my job, so there's a lot more to it. But I really want to focus on personas. Oops, don't read that. Okay, third step, persona. Who can tell me what a persona is? Actually, show of hands. Has anybody made personas before? Oh, a lot of you. Okay, great. Someone tell me what a persona is.
A representation of your target audience.
Anybody have anything to add to that? Fictional character, okay, great.
I think of it as like you're telling the story of the person you're trying to reach. You're understanding what are their goals, their aspirations, what are they like, in a way that's a little bit easier to imagine than something that's a little more theoretical.
Yeah, perfect, great. Yes, exactly. So a persona is a profile, a fictional character based on data that represents a group of users that have similar goals, pains, needs, and behaviors. So based on data is important. There's a way around it a little bit. But this is not just made up. Little Red Riding Hood, and she is a 45-year-old mother with 2 children, and that's not how this works at all. It's not made up. It's not pulled out of thin air. It comes from data, which is either based on analytics that you already have or the research that you've already done, which I just talked about. And a group of users. What I don't want to do is group all your, everyone who comes to everystudent.com from Google must be a curious person who has spiritual questions about God. That it might be tempting to group them like that, but that's not necessarily true. We have to dig in a little bit into what are they actually trying to accomplish, what are their common behaviors, what are the challenges that they have, and we'll go into this a little bit more. So you may have 2 segments, 2 completely different personas that you're choosing to serve who kind of have that profile, but because of their differences in goals and pains and needs, you're going to look at them differently. And when you reflect a persona like a real person, it allows us to empathize, to have compassion. How can you know someone who doesn't have a name? It just becomes a number, it just becomes a stat, just becomes, someone else, just a journey through a website. So giving someone a name and referring to them with a name is so helpful. I do this literally every day of my job. We create personas for the products that we're working on, and the teams are completely bought into who these personas are, and we use their names. Casey would respond in this way. Oh, but if we wanted to serve Beth, we would have to do it this way. We do it all the time. So personas help us know, love, and serve our users. To your point, Bushra, know in this case is knowing from a research perspective, knowing the common traits about our audience. Know in this perspective is literally knowing the individual. So by the time we get all the way through and we're measuring and we have an ID on that person and we literally see their journey through our content, we can know who they are. And as Russ mapped out the other day, by name, by contact info, and able to contact them again. Does that make sense? Great. So the persona is still a high level. It's not an individual understanding, but now what we're doing is we're summarizing into one thing that we can talk about and is tangible and we can connect with, so that we don't have to think about the hundreds of millions of different people, right? We're consolidating it down into something that's easy. 1 persona, or 2, or 3. And then why do personas matter? They help us focus our efforts on meeting our goals and meeting the needs of our users. So when we have a specific goal and we know that our user is, or our persona is, I'm going to show one, Bahati. Well, that means we get to hold our business goals, our ministry goals, in tandem with Bahati's visit goals. How are we going to serve her? How are we going to speak to her so that she trusts us? Trust is a really important thing here. But also, so that as she trusts us, she might go on a journey with us, moving towards our business goals, our ministry goals, excuse me. Does that make sense? Helps us focus what content we're writing. It also helps us focus our design. I was talking with someone at lunch, that sometimes your homepage, you may design that very, very specifically for one persona, even though you have a second or third audience that comes to this site. The PACT team back here was talking about how they think that the campus web, the every student version there, has a couple of audiences. One is this kind of curious, probably spiritually curious audience that comes in. Another is maybe not spiritually curious, but they enter in by some search. And another is actually a hostile audience that are very much against it, but they're still visiting. You can't treat those three audiences the same and expect them all to respond to the gospel on a page in the same way. But if we understand that we have a hostile audience to this point, you could say, you know what, at this time, we are making a decision that we're not going to serve that audience. We're hoping that maybe by being present, they'll see the gospel, maybe that'll help cause a shift in their hearts, they'll become more spiritually interested. Or they could say, actually, that hostile audience is exactly who we want to go after in this time. And so we're actually going to change the targeting of our content and our ads, and we're going to speak directly to those people. And just so you know, you can have a product that had an intended audience designed for that audience, but in a moment you could say, actually, we're just going to shift our focus to this group over here, and that's okay, as long as you do it intentionally. And if you know who your audience is. Okay. The second thing I want to say about personas is that there are two types. There's a research-based persona, there's an assumptive persona. I try to be really careful about assumptive personas, but I think in this context, it's a good starting point, and they're a lot easier to start. So we're going to move forward today doing assumptive personas. I'll explain the difference so that you guys can have some experience creating these. I really, really, really want to encourage you not to leave it there. Research is what is going to completely change the effectiveness of your ministry. So research-based personas are, you go out and you do 50 interviews, or 30, or 20, or 10, whatever, however many. And you've done your market research and you've looked at existing analytics and you feel like you just really have this great understanding of your user and you craft your strategy and you go. Assumptive personas are where we are making educated, experience-based assumptions about who our users are because you've had lots of interactions with these types of people. So if all of us in this room, if we were making personas of lawyers, I don't think, unless for some reason all of you came from a legal background, we cannot make assumptive personas of lawyers because all we would be doing is making stereotypes. And everything we've seen in the movies, anything you've seen on TV, you're just taking like things that other people have told you about who lawyers are. You know, in the US, there's a lot of jokes about lawyers, that kind of thing. That's going to influence what that persona looks like. It's probably not going to be true. It's just a stereotype, and that doesn't really help us serve them. But in your context, because you're the closest connected to your audiences, I'm going to take a gamble that you have some experience, you have some educated understanding of who your audiences are, and so we're going to move forward creating them today, even though we're not going to spend time doing the research. And we'll talk about at the end identifying which of those are actually assumptions and then how do you validate those with research. If you're in a context, however, where you're going after a new audience that it's totally new, you don't understand them, maybe, you know, if I got sent to Vietnam right now, I could not do assumptive personas of the Vietnamese audience. I just don't have personal experience with them, so I would have to do a lot of research. Does this make sense, the difference between these? I see lots of head nodding. Okay, let me see what's next. Okay, and then the last piece is after you've made the personas, you identify any more components where you need more information or assumptions that you've made, and you actually go after that information, gather it, learn it, and update your personas. So your personas are 100% flexible. They are living, breathing things, just like people, and they change as your understanding of them changes and improves. So if you're seeing something completely different in analytics that's like, oh, this assumption that we made about this persona is actually not right, great. Scratch it out, literally, and change it. And then move based off of that assumption. So I don't want you to think about personas as like, oh, we do all this work, we create this really pretty document, and it becomes irrelevant, so we just push it to the side and we keep doing our thing. No, I want the personas for you guys to be something that you can literally work with every day. And as you learn something new, literally scratch it out, change it. They're not meant to be pretty documents, they're meant to be functional things that help you. Okay, are there any questions so far? Yes?
Is a persona by Coca-Cola, who makes a persona for a Chinese IT professional, different than a persona that I with crew made for a Chinese IT professional? I mean, I think I know the answer, but...
Yes, definitely. That's a great question. Thanks for asking that, because yes, our personas are not just abstract understandings. It's an understanding of who they are relative to what we're trying to do with them. So Coca-Cola is trying to sell them Coke. They're going to be thinking about recreational habits. What are the other types of things they drink? Is it, you can, like with advertising, obviously they do a lot in community. So they're looking at like, okay, all these different pieces that are related to drinking Coca-Cola. For us, I don't really care what a Chinese IT professional drinks. That has nothing to bear. I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. Someone, fix me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I'm going to be looking more at, based on the actual product, the website that you're working with, what are their goals and behaviors and tasks and needs and all these pieces that we'll talk about next related to the product. Yeah, hopefully, and if I don't clarify more, does that help? Is that what you were going after?
It does help.
Okay. Yes.
So I was just thinking, how can we create a persona of a closed kind of a group that we cannot directly access without making stereotypes? Let's say we want to target the skaters that are aiming our site, coming to our site.
Yeah.
But we cannot, we can probably, but just is there this visible audience that is very close? We cannot directly interview them or...
Great. Yeah. Good question. This is where you might have to start with. I would definitely try your best to exhaust your resources. Look at documentaries, look at industry report. Different things that you can find to help give you some clues about who these people are. Then you might actually have to make a statement and say, okay, we're going to take a guess. We're going to make an assumption. We're going to make a hypothesis. We're going to claim what we think is true, and then we're going to take an action based on that. And then you're actually going to go through the process and do an experiment and see what happens. And that experiment is going to help validate whether that assumption was true or not. I won't say that it validates it every time, but usually you can learn something from your experiment. So you might say, okay, we think that these haters are from the radical ISIS group. That's what we think. We don't really know, but maybe we can actually run an ad specifically targeting them, or we can create some content that we think is going to connect with them, or maybe alienate them and get a rise out of them. I'm not saying to do that, but I'm just as a way. And then depending on what the response is and what you see as a result, you can say, oh yeah, they responded exactly how we thought. 90% of the visitors were that. Okay, I think we've kind of locked in, or not locked in, maybe we do another experiment. Hypothesis and experimentation is really important when you're talking about actually executing, but that is a means of learning and understanding, and then you get to apply that back to who you're going after.
Two questions. The first is, how often do we go back and review our personas? And the second question is, can a persona not necessarily have like physical characteristics, but like psychological? So can I say that I want to reach everyone with depression?
Yes.
Not a certain gender, a certain age scale.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and I have made a template of some very common things that we often look like, but there's an extra box that basically says other important factor. And there may be something where you might actually be gearing your persona around depression. You may be gearing yours around this hater group. She may be gearing hers around mothers. But even within mothers, the question is, are they mothers of really young kids, or are they mothers of teenagers? That could be two different personas depending on what you're trying to do. So even depression, it could be, are you going after the people who are, feeling depressed in the moment, or are you going after people who literally are clinically depressed and they have no other place to turn? I'm not obviously an expert, but yes. Does that answer your question? No. Okay. I can definitely talk to you more specifically if that's it.
And the first question, how often?
Oh, how often? Good question. I used to say every 2 years, but I will say I just think that things change so fast that ideally it's living and breathing, like I said. Is that as you do something, as you learn, you literally update the persona, and your team has to be aligned around the understanding of the persona. And so as it's updated, your team is updated too in that understanding. So that's my recommendation, living and breathing. If not, probably once a year, kind of mini audit, re-look at them, say, okay, is there anything that's happened to make me think that anything that we've documented is wrong or off base a little bit? Do we need to do a little bit more research? Do we need to talk to a few more people? Do we need to do another experiment? Once a year is probably what I would recommend. I know that's not what anybody wants to hear, but the more you keep them updated, the easier it is. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about surveys, and you were saying we should not be doing certain things. Do you have other information about how we can run an effective survey?
Yes and no. There are tons of resources. My team is actually right now working on putting together a resource specifically around surveys. So when that's available, I will make sure, it should be done by the end of May. When that's available, I'll make sure that it's supported or sent out to this group. So yeah, definitely. I don't mean to scare you away from surveys. I just, please, use surveys, but just recognize that it's not just as simple as boom, 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 boom. Please just think through your questions and think from a user perspective of how they're going to respond and how then you're able to interpret that data. I don't know if Lauren, do you have any experience with surveys that you could speak to more? Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, I will make sure that gets passed on.
I just want to give a feedback. And could I understand persona is more like a roles of the person? So basically, instead of understanding that person, because sometimes we can get into very detail, but detail is actually lose the big picture. It's actually understanding the roles of the person. So coming up with a user persona basically is coming up with a job description and then trying to examine that whole job description and function of that role.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way to think about it. I have a couple of examples that I'll show. Definitely what you're saying is true, that these are meant to be guidelines of how we serve our users. So what we put on the page is kind of acting as bumpers, right? Are we helping them meet this goal or not? Are we alienating one of their core values? Okay, let's not do that, right? So, and if you want to think about it in a job description, if you've used that before, I'm sure that could work well. Am I answering your question?
Well, just one thing I'm just questioning about myself is how to see that from the micro way and macro way. So, because sometimes we can give the names like very micro, but then cannot scale that.
I have a couple examples. Hopefully I can touch on that. Okay, so building a persona. Here's an example. You can't read it, doesn't matter. This is one of those, and that was created through thorough research. There was a lot of research that was done to create this persona. One thing that I don't recommend that you spend any time on is crafting a beautiful story that tells the story of Dimitri's life and his 4 kids and his dog Fido and everything. I'm not trying to diminish that. Sometimes those details are really helpful, but in this context, we probably don't care that they have a dog named Fido. And one thing that can be really hard when you get to the granularity, I'm sorry that it's really hard to see, but basically his story, it becomes kind of like you were saying, a very kind of tunnel vision, and we don't want our persona to take this group way out here and go so focused that we actually don't capture the group. So it's okay to stay at a high level, but it still needs to be a person that we can relate to. So here's another example. Bahati. Bahati was actually created for GodTools, and she is a combination of data and assumption. There were assumptions that were put into here, and because we weren't sure how to test it, it's actually currently being tested. But her quote, the quote for me is the most important thing. I want to reach others, but I don't know where to start. Bahati is in Ethiopia, late 20s. She clicked on an ad. She has no discipler. She knows no other Christians, or she knows other Christians, sorry. Her goals, learn to share her faith, touch just one life, and give expression to what she already believes. Pain point, she doesn't know how to initiate conversation, share the gospel, or bring to decision. She lacks confidence. She has no previous or ongoing training. How many people feel like they know, in general, who Bahati is now? Okay, only a few. Well, that part of it is that as we speak, so we actually literally talk about Bahati regularly, and we use her name in conversation, and we talk about how are we serving Bahati, how are we helping Bahati accomplish her goals. This becomes, yes, in some ways, the more information you have, the more specific you can get, and I would encourage that, but I would also encourage that not to lose the highest level. If I started saying what denomination she was a part of, and if I said that, even in this case, it didn't really matter that she was educated or wasn't. Sometimes that might matter, and you're gonna have to decide that it does. But here, it didn't really matter. She clicked on an ad, that gives us some understanding. So it kind of keeps it broad enough that we can still serve a very large audience, even though we've given her a name and a face. Here's another one that we've done. This one is even sloppier, if you want to use that word. It's not beautiful, but this persona right here has really changed the way that we have created one of our products. And because we refer to Casey all the time, it's not really that different from Bahati in terms of the content, but just you can see that this is literally sitting up, pinned up on the wall near my desk, that the entire team is aligned around. So you don't have to make these things look pretty, and we talk about her all the time. Here's another one, a persona that started with Post-its. You're actually going to do this today. And this persona was then kind of consolidated into this persona. And all of these personas are examples of ones that we have made in the last year for the products and sites that we're working on. And it helps us make our design decisions, our content decisions, our marketing decisions. All of the team is are aligned around these. Okay. So I'm gonna, yes.
Are y'all asking like from the field, are you asking for personas that are being created as this trickles out to be sent to y'all? Because you can sit in Orlando and create a persona for an Ethiopian lady, but people in Ethiopia probably have a better one.
That is a good point. We are, when we do the research, we are definitely reaching into the field. So please don't think that we're just sitting there and designing. In some cases, we have to start there. But we are doing our best to go. But I think that's a great idea. So if anybody has personas they want to send us, no, that's a great idea. And I think that we could probably explore that as more and more people are trained in creating them. That's really helpful for us to know the audiences that you guys are serving to. Yes, thank you, Travis. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this audience grid that Wes kind of introduced to you. These slides are directly from our marketing team who's been helping to create this concept. So I'm not going to read the, can you guys read the labels? No. I don't know if you can. Okay. The bottom row is our scale of belief, which I believe it was Russ introduced yesterday. Unaware, curious, follower, and guide. Now, I 100% understand if you were to say our audiences don't fit perfectly in those categories. That's okay. This was created to be the one sort of a high-level view that lots of different scales could fit into. So I would encourage you, don't just say, okay, a curious person or an unaware person, but you can take that unaware person and you might actually have two categories in there. You might have literally 100% unaware, they've never heard the gospel before, they don't even know who Jesus is. You might have hostile, that's okay. That's kind of in that unaware category, and you guys can have that for yourself. What's really helpful though is to know that it's within this unaware category. When we come to kind of a centralized look at measuring and knowing, we can start to get some more combined numbers around the groups. The vertical scale is, think of it as their benefit from their relationship with you and your site. So, can someone tell me what those labels are? Something moderate and profound. None, moderate, and profound. So, an example of someone who is unaware and none is probably someone who has literally never heard Jesus' name before, who happens upon every student. They've never interacted with crew, with every student, with any brand. They have no relationship to the brand, and that brand really, so far, hasn't given them any value. They're going to be in this unaware, none category. Someone in the top right, guide and profound, is going to be probably someone who's pretty highly invested in your ministry. Maybe they're using one of your tools as ongoing discipleship material, or sharing content from a website with the people around them. That's going to be someone who's highly invested, has a profound relationship, and then there is every level in between. So you can just, it just helps you to think about, sometimes, I think we were talking yesterday about returning users. Probably frequently returning users are going to be higher, and newer first-time visitors are going to be lower, but they might be first time on your site, but they might actually have a relationship with another crew brand that you know of, so just keep that in consideration. Do you want to add to that? Anybody want to add to this? So to help you think about your personas a little bit more condensed, and there are some voice and tone helps too with this. Identifying which group a persona is in is a good first step. Again, it's really important for you to feel like you have ownership of your audiences that you're serving. I don't want you to feel like you're being put in a box, but what we're trying to do is help you take a step towards making progress with this. So when you identify where an audience is, which box, they're probably going to be thinking different things, having different level of belief, requiring different investment from you, and so this is a way to think about it. The slides are in the folder, if I haven't said that. These literally describe what each one of these blocks kind of looks like. I can't read it up here. Does anybody have it open and want to just read an example?
Group I, those who don't know or don't care for faith and do not know Cru digitally or receive limited benefit. While they are on their own journey, they can receive secular benefit from Cru's knowledge or resources. Of course, the divine spark may ignite at any time. The belief is unaware and the benefit is none.
Okay, so these, again, it's probably pretty straightforward descriptions, but if you identify a group, it might be worth reading the description and it could spark some idea like, oh, that's right, that's true, my audience. And down the road, there are more things that are coming behind this, like, okay, voice and tone for this audience might be different than this audience. So this is a good first step. So, it's your turn. Maybe. It's your turn. What I want you guys to do is to split up into groups of 2 or 3. So if you're a group of 4 or more in a country, split up into multiple groups. If you're just 3, you guys can stay together, or 2 stay together. There is paper and Post-its and pens on your tables. The first step that I want you to just take 1 or 2 minutes to do, I want you to choose based on the content strategy that you worked on, the Mad Libs. I know probably nobody finished, but because you already have that mindset, I want you to think 1 property, 1 audience. I want you to just choose someone. Figure that out with your partner, and if you have multiple groups like this table, if you're splitting up, make sure you guys pick 2 different audiences to do this exercise for, so you're not doing duplicate work. So really quick, make that decision. Who are we going after? And you can use this grid to kind of make that initial decision to identify that. Any questions? Just take 1 minute. A different color sticky note. And I want you to do the same exercise. What challenges does your user face? What pain points does your user experience on a regular basis? I'll say it again. These can be specific pain points that are directly related to your site, or they could be bigger picture pain points. Does anybody have an example of something that might be a big picture pain point that their user has that's relevant but not connected to their site? Perfect. Okay, so students, a challenge is that their parents have expectations for them to be successful. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with, or it doesn't directly relate to everystudent.com or something else, but it's a real thing in their lives that you may be able to speak into that may change the way that you write your content, that makes a design decision change. So that's a great example, Marie. Okay, any questions about pain points? Can we do 2 minutes? Try to write some on your own. Don't talk. Do it on your own for just a couple minutes, and then you can start to share. A curious, unaware woman, Arab woman, unaware Arab woman, okay? Who is unaware Arab woman, who is low on the scale, so I, okay? Great. And can you say your goal again? Oh,
to explain or to deliver the whole case of the Arab woman and her personal case or her personal problem.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you for that. Someone else give an example? Great. Go ahead.
The pains or the challenges.
Tell the audience first.
The audience first is any non-Christian who is looking for a meaning.
Looking for a meaning?
Yeah, a meaning. Or,
Like meaning in life.
Meaning. Looking for meaning. Someone looking for meaning. Okay.
So someone trying to find
Okay.
meaning in their life. So the pains are the unknown future, security, probably health, social suffocation from control, and loss of hope in change in the society.
Okay. Good. Anyone else? Someone else. Russia team, you have a ton. You should share. Oh, sorry. Hold on, Russia.
The goal is audience user. It's the young men who are immigrant, and they want to look
Where on the scale of would you put them?
for unaware.
Unaware. Great.
And they are looking for jobs, immigration, to improve their life, money, and probably hope in life.
Great.
And some challenges, it's you want to have peace and the war, because they suffer from war. And it's the family destruction. So they're looking for.
Okay. Perfect. That's good. And just one example, there is saying that they want peace is actually a goal statement. Even though they want peace, that's the goal, because they're experiencing war, that's the challenge. So that's kind of twofold. So just to clarify, you can put wanting peace as a goal. Okay.
Yeah, we went for a category of a curious non-believer, and some of we also decided to put the goals or challenges and things in the person singulars to be able to be better, to be able to identify with that person better.
And are they a student? Did you decide
Yes,
to be a student?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're right. So some of the goals, I want to explore and understand life. I want to see what others think. I want to be heard. I want to socialize online by discussing things. I want to be able to provide for a family. I want to excel in my studies. I want a life of meaning. I want to impact society. So those are some of our goals. And as far as challenges and pains, I don't want to be alone. Future is unknown. I feel disconnected, even though I'm always connected. I live in a highly competitive world, fear to fail. I live in a world of pain and injustice. I don't know how to make decisions, long-term decisions, especially I'm misunderstood. I don't feel like I have a voice, socially, politically, etc.
Those are great. Awesome. I kind of feel like I know who the Russian curious student is now. Awesome. Okay. The last thing I want you to do is to put it all together. So I know it's 4 o'clock. I'm going to do a time check with Rich/Russ. It's 4 o'clock. Can we have 10 more minutes? Is that okay? Okay.
Yes, you may.
Okay. There is, in your folder, there is a template that looks like this. This might look scary, but it's meant to be helpful. these are some different categories that I want you to think through. And I would love it if you would literally go in there, open it up, make a copy, and do this right now. Type these things in. The categories are goals and challenges, and pain points are the ones you've already done. So if you could narrow it down to 5, what are the 5 core things? That's a good starting point for this. Don't start with the name. Do the name and the demographics and all that stuff. Do that last, because that's kind of like putting the icing on the cake. So goals and challenges and pains. Lists of values. This is like, I heard yesterday in PACT, relationship is huge. Like maybe overriding some things that in the Western culture we would be more focused on. So what are the values? Integrity, honesty, things like that they really care about. Building trust. I want to talk about this for a second because this has been an underlying theme for the whole talk so far. So what we want to do is build trust and not just have a transactional relationship. Transactional means I give you something, you give me something. I give you something, you give me something. We want them to trust us. We want them to trust what they're being told. We want them to come back because they trust us. So this is an exercise to go through to say, what is it going to take for them for us to earn their trust? And maybe on the flip side, what could we do that would make them leave, we would lose their trust? If we can acknowledge that what those things are, we know not to do those things. A good example of this is the difference between, let's see, you come to visit me in my home, and I say, hey, will you chop my wood for me for my fireplace? And they would say, what are you going to give me for it? Okay, I'll give you $10. Great, they chopped my wood, I gave them $10. They leave. That's not a great relationship. They're probably not going to want to come back because they know they're going to be asked to chop wood even though they get $10. And if the $10, they want it, then maybe that's the right thing. Instead, I want to build trust so that they come over and maybe I'm giving them something. I make them a meal every time they come. And over time, they learn. At some point, they might be willing to give me something for free. Right? So I might go to their house after 4 or 5 times and say, oh my gosh, I really need a favor. I'm locked out of my house. I need dinner. And they might be willing to make me dinner because I've earned their trust. So I want you to think about that example. How do we build trust? This is an actual relationship. In the context of ministry, if you are literally building a relationship with someone that you want to share the gospel with, you probably aren't just going to walk up to them and say, you're a sinner, you're going to hell, you need Jesus, here's the gospel, good riddance, right? Over time, especially in some of the areas that you're in, it takes a ton of relationship, a ton of trust. They see you, how you live your life. They believe the words that you're saying. They see the difference in your life, and because of that, they're going to be more likely to respond to the gospel. So when we think about our sites, think about how they are helping to build trust and develop a relationship and not create just a transactional, I give you something, you give me something. I give you something, you give me something. Sometimes those things need to happen, and that's okay. But that's not what we're trying to develop as our core brand, our core voice, our culture, okay? So this is the exercise for that. Content consumption, there's a couple of questions there. Where are you most likely to find them? What devices are they using? What channels are they using? Do they have a specific time? Is it they have a 2-hour commute to work in the morning? Great, let's write that down. Below interest and motivation to engage, this is kind of like extra things. Like Like if you know they really love football, great, put that down, because that could be something that you can use as a way to connect with these people that they might be willing to engage with you on. It's kind of like when you're building a relationship with someone, you learn what are they interested in, what are their hobbies, what do they like to do, what do they like to talk about. If they have family, maybe you know about their family. So these are things that help us to know what they care about so we can connect with them. Bottom, or the far side, characteristics and personal description. This is maybe one of the last things you're going to do. Over here, it'll say a woman, and maybe there are more specifics about this woman that you need to know so that you can know who she is, to give more characteristic to her. The bottom category I mentioned before, some other important category. I'll give you an example. We were doing a study on pastors, and we found that there were 3 different types of pastors, and actually there was a core difference in what they believed about evangelism. So someone believed that it could be taught. Someone believed it was 100% the result of the Holy Spirit and couldn't be taught. It's not to say one is wrong or right, even though we know what Cru believes about that, but we decided that that was a core distinctive, and so we had a category that was just talking about the differences in their beliefs about evangelism. That was very specific to that example. If there's something specific to yours, please write it down. The last thing you'll do, add a photo, give them a quote. So a quote is the essence. So Bahati said, I want to share my faith, I just don't know how. That was kind of the essence of who she was. So in connection with what your site is trying to do for this person, what is their quote? What is the essence of who the person is? Give them a name. The audience group is what you've already identified on the grid, so you can put the letter and then the scale of belief and the vertical. And then list of important demographics, just a quick identifier like a non-believing Russian student or a middle-aged mother of teenagers, that kind of thing. Doesn't have to be in depth. I know this is a lot, but I wanted to make sure that you guys could walk away with this and have a start to it. I don't know if it's worth it to dig into it for just 5 minutes. Do you guys want 5 minutes to start this?
Yes.
Okay. The answer is yes. Okay, you have 5 minutes to start this. Did everyone find it in the folder? Are there any questions that I can answer as you're working? It is. Oh, no, it's in the folder. I cannot. Let me put it in Slack.
Jadi kami yang belum yakin bukan berarti ini saya sudah tangguh.
What are based on fact finding? The more research you do, the more people you talk to, the more real stories that you hear to give you this data, the more analytics you look at, you can validate all of these assumptions. Does that make sense? Acknowledging assumptions? Okay. Update them regularly. We already talked about that. Don't let them go stale. And the last thing here is to fall in love with your persona. What I really want to encourage you to do is not create a persona that has characteristics that you detest. So let's say we're talking about the hater group over here, right? Even that name, hater group, kind of makes me want to hate them. I'm just being honest, right? But the goal is, how do we love them? So how do you get under the surface to where you actually can find compassion for these people so you have a desire to serve them and meet them where they're at? Not say like, oh, this is the person who, like, let's call him Paul, right? This is the person who kills Christians. Like, we don't like this person. We don't want to serve him. But how do we kind of change the narrative a little bit to create somebody that we care for, it doesn't change the characteristics, but just how we speak about them. Does that make sense? We want to love these people because we want to serve them. Okay, last thing is just a couple examples of how you can use these. So I already said, pin them up, literally. Put them above your workspace. Share them with your coworkers. As you're creating them, the more people that you can engage in the creation, the more aligned you're going to be. Then, literally, bring them with you to your meetings. I cannot tell you how many times Russ used to make fun of me for walking around with my posters under my arm, walking down the hall. I've got Casey, Beth, and Adrian coming with me to the meeting. But it literally changes the way that we talk about our users. They're up on the wall. We're having a conversation about designing a very specific type of content for them, and we say, hey, wait. Casey doesn't care about that, and it alienates Adrian. We don't need to go down that path. Or Beth really cares about that. Casey really cares about that. Let's go after it. Or, guys, if we don't do this, Casey won't even come to our site. So we literally talk about them like real people. We have them in front of us. Another good example, I don't think I can pull it up. This literally is happening as we speak. I just got an email about it. We had an advertisement on Facebook for one of our products, and when I was reading the copy of it, it said something very opposite of what our persona was. So the, oh, did you get it? Yeah. Thank you. Not that I can read it. Okay, can you go down, Wes? Keep going. Keep going. Wait, is it that one? Okay, no, go down one more. Keep going. Okay, this one. So Mission Hub, maybe some of you are familiar with Mission Hub. This is open to the public, and we've released new functionality in the last year that helps people take steps of faith with people in their life. It's not just internal to crew anymore. And we have personas that are literally a multiplying disciple who's already doing that. They don't really need an app to help them, but they care about the people that they're discipling to help them do that in their lives. Then you have a persona about the person who wants to reach people, kind of like Bahati. I want to do this, but I don't know how. And then there's the person who's the Christian and doesn't care about this. Just goes to church and goes home. Those are three personas that we have. This one, you can't see it, but in the blue it says, see God at work in your life. And go down here. I can't read it. Mission Hub helps you decide your next best step as you live out your life. I read that and I was like, wow, that has literally nothing to do with who our target audience is, Casey and Beth. It's not about them, it's about the people that they're reaching. And so we actually went to the person who wrote this ad and said, hey, we need to refine the language because it's not going to connect with Casey and with Beth. And so they're actually, this is the document, they're in the process, and they changed it. Mission Hub helps you focus on taking regular steps of faith with the people in your life. And the upper line is changing to see God at work and know you're a part of it. So just an example of literally using the persona names, who we care about, so that we can make sure our language is connecting with them. And in order to do that, we actually shared our persona document with the person who was writing this so that they knew who they were writing to. Does that make sense? Good example? Yeah, I can't think of other good examples, but. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I know we went way over. I know it was a lot. I wish we could be here for 3 more days and I could help you work through it. Oh, is there a microphone? Sure.
So, part with the
part with building trust with so online, that's really difficult. So do you have any tips how we can manage that?
I think the only thing, maybe there are other people who have good examples. I'd love to open it up. I think the most important thing is there anything like obvious that would make them not trust you, or that would draw them in? So Vladimir gave a really great example yesterday. I hope I can use this example of Vladimir. I asked them if they had any sites that were connected to the goal of 10 million multiplying disciples. And he said, to be honest with you, our people aren't as motivated by numbers, we're motivated by relationship. Doesn't mean the numbers don't matter. But if all I talk about in my content to them is numbers, 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 they probably are just gonna say, that's like, you don't really get me. I don't really trust that you know what I care about, right? And so that's an example of, can you identify the things that could alienate them a little bit versus pull them in. It's not none of this is a science. I wish it were. It is very much an art. Okay, are there other questions about personas? We are going to talk about on Thursday how we take a persona and how we create a content journey specific for that persona and a goal that you're trying to accomplish. So we'll bring this back around again and actually put them to work to create some content. So hopefully that would be helpful to seeing how they're used.
Is it a good idea that if I haven't done a persona, that I see who is currently, who am I reaching right now, and use that as a persona? So what I can do, for example, is read all the messages that have come to my website, for example, for the last 2-3 months, and all the sort of questions, and from that I would build a persona and say they have this question, this question, this question, this question. So it's like a flexible persona that I don't decide, but my audience.
Yeah, definitely. So the step one that we went through was to identify through analytics or current users who is your audience, whether it was intended or wasn't, but it's existing. So who is coming to your site? Because if they're coming, you already have a captive audience. Yes, let's understand them so that we can meet them where they're at even better, even if it wasn't intended. In terms of how you create the persona, please use that information. That is a great example. In fact, I should have said that. Yes, comments on Facebook about things, reviews, questions that they send in. If you have something like more of a product and people are sending in like help requests, those things all help you understand what your users care about, and you can resource information from those. The second thing is, I wouldn't just say, oh, well, here's a really common question. I'm going to create a persona around this question. I would say, how do you adapt that to either audiences you know that it exists? Does it actually already match one of your existing audiences? Or maybe it doesn't. And if you do, maybe that's what starts it, but I would definitely try to round it out to give you more understanding. And that reminds me, you had asked me to touch on this. You can have multiple audiences. So I want you to hear that what I'm not saying is pick one audience only, forget everyone else, you don't care about them. That's not true. But, so when you're talking about designing a website, you typically want to choose one primary audience. When I'm creating this, who is this for? So these guys here have something for their partners that they're working with. So that is their intended audience, who they're going to be gearing their messaging, their content, their design is going to be around that. Do you think that they're going to have other types of people that come to that site? Probably. They might not be their intended audience, or they might say, oh, actually, it's another set. It's not yet existing partners. Awesome. We actually really care about that audience. It's a secondary audience. How do we serve them? So identifying primary and secondary, and even maybe there's tertiary, a third audience. When you're designing, when you're creating your website, it's really important to know who's your primary, because it helps you say no to certain things. We were having this conversation over here. I need to serve everyone in the whole globe. Well, that's awesome, but we can't. We just have limited capacity. So we gotta pick something, we have to focus. But if like we're gonna go through this content journey, maybe we identify a secondary audience, like yet to be partners, and we do a very specific content journey where they are the audience. That's okay. So for a specific content journey, you can pick any audience that you want, but it's really important that your site has one or maybe two primary audiences, and just define who those are so you know what your scope is and who you're serving. Any other questions? We're so over time, okay.
So you talk about business goals and user goals. Can I understand that the business goal basically is the foundation of your product and business, but the user goal is more about market.
Yeah, explain more.
So just with market, with business, one is about persona, but also they're looking at competitors.
Mm-hmm.
So how that is going to work with ministries? Because if we think about personas, but it's more about our hypothesis, because we don't look at other competitors. But with business, when they look at personas, we look at competitors.
Yes, that's true. I think we can still look at competitors even though we don't think about them as competitors. Do you have a comment about this?
Well, when I think about competitors, what comes to my mind is our brothers from majority religion. They're our competitors in a sense because they also have a message they want to convey to the same audience, which is different from ours, but it's kind of in the same
I see what you're
direction.
saying. Yeah, that's a great place to learn about your users, right? So if your target audience is a non-believing, unaware Muslim, what are the competitive Muslim sites saying to those people? You can probably learn a lot by learning from them. So I don't know if that answers your question. Tell me what your question was.
Well, so just how to find competitors, that's the first one. The second one is what we should advertise for them. Because ministries always talk about partnership. They don't see each other as competitors.
We can talk about that
Okay,
later.
great. We're going to talk about marketing later. We'll come back to that if we don't ask it again. Anything else? Was this helpful? Was it helpful to think through who your audiences and personas are? Did you have a question?
I have a comment.
Okay.
Actually, I want to thank you because normally when I give personas as a lecture or when I do personas, it's all about how I view people and how I want things to go or how I want to plan things. But now we're talking about, no, forget about you. It's about them.
Yeah. Yes, forget about you. It's all about them.
Okay, thank you, Leah. Great job.